Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to a brand new video. My name is Arfad and thanks for joining me once again. In today's video, as you can already tell from the title, I found it necessary to make this video because of what's happening around the world at the moment. Islam, Christianity and Judaism, we share a lot of similar roots, for example. We all believe that there's only one God, though if you look from a Christian perspective or not from a Christian perspective, you would believe that the Trinity is not actually monotheism. But if you look from what the Christians claim themselves, they believe that they are monotheists as well. So from this perspective, right, if we give them whatever they want to say who they are and what they claim they are, then we can say Judaism, Islam and Christianity, according to the Western narrative, we are actually a monotheistic religion. If you go into the technicalities, obviously, we can agree to disagree. From my own personal point of view is I don't believe that Christianity and Judaism are monotheistic religion. Right? Because monotheist basically means that you believe there's only one God. And this is definitely not if you put the Trinity into the picture, then I would argue that the Trinity is not monotheistic, as well as Jews. If you look at the belief of the Jews, they believe that Yahweh is their God. Okay? But they not necessarily reject the existence of other deity as well. And so this is rejected in Islam as well. So rejected in Islam. So the difference between Islam as compared to Judaism and Christianity is that Islam believes that there's only one deity, La ilaha illallah, and that this deity is the only deity worthy of worship, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, but if, like I said, if we give the preachers of the religion or the religious people, who whatever religion, whatever kind of beliefs or practices they claim for themselves, then we see that the Christianity, Judaism and Islam, we are monotheistic religion. Now, with that being said, with what's happening around the world at the moment, if it is not difficult for you to actually go to YouTube or go to Twitter or different other social media platform and find that people are actually trying to spread a lot of hatred between the different religions that I've mentioned. And it is very important for us to educate ourselves that while we may disagree with the tenets and belief of other faith, it can even be Hinduism, it can even be Buddhism, Jainism, Taoism, Buddhism, whatever it is. But that doesn't mean that we should call for violence. In fact, we should condemn violence. We should condemn hostility. And we should try our best to unite in terms of community. There's a lot of things that we can do. There's a lot of poor people in the world today. And we need the different religious communities to actually come together to provide these people support, or to provide some helping, to lend a helping hand to these groups of people who are in need, who are so in dire need of our assistance. And one of the best way for people to come together is to actually disregard whatever beliefs and faith we have, and from a humanitarian perspective, we should come together. But instead of what's happening in some places around the world, religious leaders are actually promoting hatred and violence against the different religion. Now, they may not necessarily call for violence per se, but the way they advocate their speech and the way they produce or iterate their sermons is somewhere along that line. And this is something unfortunate. Just because politics are involved, that doesn't mean that you should involve politics and religion together. Now, previously in the ancient world, religion and politics, they are not separate. They are together. Especially in the Greco-Roman world and in the Roman Empire, the religion that the emperor embraces, these are the religion that is passed on to the community or promoted in the community, though not forced. Okay? These religions are not necessarily forced to the people, but no doubt it has been promoted, and there are some sense or some forms of need to embrace this religion. But in the modern world today, people are free to choose whatever religion they want for themselves or non-religion. Atheism, agnosticism, for example. And one of the last thing that we need is to actually, for religious preachers to promote some sense of opposition against the different religion. Now, we may disagree. Theologically, we may disagree. But that should not, I repeat, that should not actually be the dividing factor as to whether we come together as a community to do some humanitarian works or for the betterment of the society and community in terms of our sciences, mathematics, so on and so forth. We should not isolate ourselves from the different communities, no matter what these communities are, even if we oppose their beliefs. Because we live in the world today whereby there's enough space for everyone. And the last thing that we want to do is to call for violence, is to physically harm the other community, because all these are actually acts that are considered non-21st century. Now, if we look throughout the history, we have the Crusades, right? We have the wars, many wars that we have in the past that are religiously motivated under the covers of some political gains. And this is true throughout the majority of the world, in the ancient world. But today we are more educated. I'm not saying that the ancient people are not educated, but we are educated differently as compared to them, because we have a separation between state and religion. But this should be used more towards our advantage, because this allows for people to come together, to set aside their religious beliefs, and to come together to provide betterment for the community, to eradicate poverty, to eradicate all this violence and hatred that is happening around the world. Now, if you look at the media will always report certain kind of biases. But there's a lot of violence and hatreds that are not being reported in the media that is happening around the world today. Be it so religiously motivated or politically motivated. But from my research and from what I've gathered, politics itself is not an isolation. There's always some religious inclinations behind it. For example, the wars that is happening in Israel and Palestine today. Okay. It is not so much politically motivated as compared to religiously motivated. Now, people might disagree with this, and we can agree to disagree with this. But if you look at what's being mentioned, it is more towards religiously motivated, because biblical texts are being quoted, being cited. Now, obviously, there are political reasons as well. For example, oil, right, natural resources, so on and so forth. But it is more religiously motivated. Now, this is unfortunate. This is unfortunate as well. Now, it takes two hands to clap. Right? It takes two hands to clap. But we should also know that one party has actually gone too far. And so, but that is that should not actually deter us from coming together in the future as well, right? Because the people that are driving this, they are just the minority, and unfortunately, they have influence. They have been able to influence the majority into thinking that they are actually doing the right thing. Now, if you don't know who I'm mentioning, right? Obviously, the Israelis and the Palestinians, okay? The wars that are being that is happening, the genocide that is happening, it is actually religiously motivated, and it is a war that did not start on October the 7th, but it is a war that actually dates back to the founding of Israel, but even before that, 1890s. Okay? And so this is unfortunate, and a lot more could have been done by the leaders of the world. But that's not what I'm trying to get at. What I'm trying to get at is people have actually used this situation, this sits in Lebanon, this unfortunate situation, to have some political or religious leverage in their own isolated community. And they are using this to gain fame, they are using this to gain some political strength or support at the cost of the community in a negative way, right? In fact, they should actually come out and say that whatever that's happening, right? Majority of the Jews do not agree with what's happening in Israel. And majority of the Muslims do not actually support what Hamas is actually doing. And so we should learn to isolate ourselves from the media, because when the media reports something, they portray as if the entire Muslim community supports whatever Hamas is actually doing. And whatever the Israelis are doing, the Jews support them as well. So this is unfortunately not true. Right? Majority of Jews, or people who believe in Judaism, do not actually support whatever the Israelis are actually doing. Okay? The genocide has been well documented around the world, all over the social media platform, over the internet, so on and so forth. Now, some of this footage, you have to take them with a grain of salt. Right, some have been exaggerated, so on and so forth, but nevertheless, the genocide is actually true. I'm not downplaying the genocide, because the genocide is well documented, right? But you also have to be careful that some images that I've come across, they actually, edited, heavily edited. But no doubt, whatever that's happening is atrocious. The once blooming land of the Palestinians in Gaza, they are now flat with what's happening. They are turned to rubble and dust, so on and so forth. A lot of people have been murdered, killed, so on and so forth. But again, with that being said, whatever statements that are being reported out there, whatever comments that are being made by the religious leaders or the religious community, or even by people, right? We should not actually take them or view them with a sense of hatred towards what's happening. No, I'm not saying that we should not hate what's happening. We should hate, definitely, because we should hate genocide, right? We should not support genocide. The killings, regardless, the killings of Palestinian or the killings of Africans, the killings of every people around the planet. What's happening in Ukraine as well. Okay? But we should not read any statement with the intent whereby we want to hurt the other people, whereby we do not want to deal with the other community anymore because of what their brethren, okay, are doing. It could be that the people that we are dealing with, our friends, our families, who are not in the same religion as us, they reject all these atrocities. And even if they support these atrocities, according to our view, right, This doesn't mean that we should actually hate them, we should not help them, right? We should not render help when they needed our help, so on and so forth. Right? The best thing, as the Prophet advised, if we have nothing good to say, we just zip our mouth. Right? But that doesn't mean that if they need our help, we should say, "Oh, you support the genocide, so I'm not going to help you." No, that is the wrong mindset. We should still help them because they are not directly involved with what's happening, right? They are not directly involved. And even if they are directly involved, right, in terms of humanity, we should still support them to the best that we can. Okay? For example, if they are hurt, they are being beaten up on the streets, right, which is wrong. No one should be beaten up on the streets, regardless of what they have done, right? If you feel that what they have done is actually wrong, there are the proper channels that you should approach, right? They should be given a trial. They should be given the opportunity to defend themselves, right? In accordance to the civil law or the law of the land, right? And so this is justice, right? Just because the oppositions or people that we disagree with dealt with our brethren unjustly doesn't mean that we should follow their footsteps. But this is very important because a lot of people who supports or who oppose the ideas that we oppose, or sorry, who support the ideas that we oppose, they are being beaten up on the streets. Right? And so this is unfortunate. When you watch videos of this, this is unfortunate. And the most unfortunate thing is that people celebrate this. People post videos of this online. If you look at the comment section, people celebrate their mishap. Now, to a certain degree, do you want to say, do they deserve this? Right? You might want to say, yes, they deserve this because of what they have done, because of what their hands have toiled. But on the other hand, you should not deal with people unjustly, right? Because everybody should be given a platform for trials, and we should not physically abuse people or even verbally abuse people. Sometimes our tongue, can do more damage because we can influence people, and a lot of harmful things can come out of them. Now, if you are a believer in religion, right? Now, even if you are not a believer in religion, if you are a believer in humanity, right, the last thing that you want to do is to call for violence, right? Because these are acts of irresponsible person. This is an act of a very irresponsible person. Now, people might not realize it. Out of hatred, out of emotions, they might slip. But it is very important that if these sort of things ever happen, that they should actually retract. They should actually counter what they have said. Right? Because the Prophet ﷺ said that, right, you should speak the truth even if it's against yourself. Right? And so if you've made a mistake publicly, then it is up to you to clarify these mistakes publicly. If not, it is up to the people who know to publicly correct the mistakes that you have made. And when you are being corrected, you should not actually be upset about it, because you've made a mistake, and everybody makes mistakes. And so we should always have this openness to be corrected privately and publicly. Now, obviously, if we made a mistake privately, then the people who knows this should approach us privately. But if we made a mistake openly, right, then the people should inform us to correct this, or they can make a refutation of us publicly, and that is fine. That the mindset should be that should be fine, because that is how society grows, right? And that is how scholarships are actually done throughout the centuries, not only in the Western world, right? Throughout everywhere. That's how scholarships are being done. Scholars wrote papers to refute each other. Scholars wrote books to refute each other. Right? Scholars made videos to refute other scholars in this modern era. Right? And so it is also up to us, right, to respectfully call out these people whenever we feel that they have actually said something that is incorrect or said something that could cause hatred and violence amongst our community. Now, we may disagree with them theologically, ideologically, whatever it is that we may disagree with them. Morally, we may disagree with them. Right? But it is never up to us to take things into our own hand. And this is something that we should always remember. Right? One thing that we can learn, one thing that I really learned from my community and how the leaders of my country actually deals with this when the war broke out, okay, in October the 7th, so on and so forth, right, is that the leaders of my community, right, actually came out and gives a history, gives a detailed clarification, and actually advises the community as to how they should react, right? Fairly, they should react fairly. And this promotes religious harmony that we have had for many decades, right? And perhaps the other countries can learn from the leaders of my country as to how they actually handle sensitive issues and sensitive matters, because it is very important. It is very important because people will disagree with one another, but the last thing that we want to do is for the community to be at odds with one another just because we do not know how to properly deal with sensitive issues. Right? So sensitive issues, no doubt, must be addressed in a timely manner and also in a way that is appropriate, and also in a way that doesn't cause further upset to both parties or to anyone that are being addressed. Right? Now, obviously, you cannot please everyone because there are people out there that are very radical in their approach. For example, there are people who says that, this is the way that you should do it, and any other way that doesn't conform to your understanding of the way of what the religion is teaching you, these people are actually out. Right? And this is the Khawarij mentality, Khawarij mentality. Right? If you know the history of Islam. And so this is also the proto-Orthodox mentality, if you know the history of Christianity. And so this is also, unfortunately, the ideology that are prevalent amongst our society as well. You can label them extremists, you can label them whatever labels you want, right? It is unfortunate, and people should reach out to them. But these people, I've reached out to them personally. There are people that I know that do embrace this sort of ideology. But it is difficult to reach out to them because they don't appeal to the evidence that you bring. Perhaps people who know psychology, they are in a better position to so-called get into their minds and help them see that there are many different ways to interpret a particular matter. Right? Obviously, you are not a scholar, and even scholars do not interpret things in isolation. Right? They always consult the various scholars, right? Because if you believe that you are right in things that are open to interpretation, right? We're not talking about how many rakats must you pray for Maghrib, right? If you say 4, that means you are out, because majority of the consensus, right, agree that it's 3 rakat for Maghrib. And so if you promote that you should pray 4 rakat for Maghrib, which is the 4th prayer of the day, in Islam, the fourth prayer or the fifth prayer of the day, then basically you are definitely out. Because this is rejected. This is not what the Prophet said. We have clear text indicating. And even clear text, okay, doesn't mean it's clear text. You can interpret things on your own. You should always accept the interpretation of the majority of the consensus of the scholars. Right? Just because if you read in the Quran, just because it says something, or you read in any religious text, just because it says something, doesn't mean you have the authority to interpret things as they are. No, we should always go back to the commentaries, go back to the literatures, go back to the people who have knowledge in our community, right? We should not interpret things based on our own desires, our own will, because what happens is that we will definitely go wrong. We will go wrong because we do not have the knowledge or the capacity or the ability or the training that all these scholars who are part of the committee, right, they have all these years and years of experience, and they are definitely in a better position due to their knowledge of the vast literatures that are out there, the vast interpretations, okay, whatever the people of the past, the scholars of the past have been saying about this particular text, they know them all, right? And so we should always go back to the scholars, because we are not scholars. And even scholars do not actually interpret things out of their own will. Right? They will put up a paper, argue their position, and see what the rest of the community thinks. Right? And if whatever they say gain support from the majority, right, then the textbooks will be rewritten to support their ideas. Right? So there's always ways and proper procedures as to how you should go about doing things. Because if you actually look at the commentary, the reason behind all whatever I mentioned for the past 10 minutes is to lead to my final point. If you read the commentaries, right, if you read the commentaries as what is happening in Israel, Palestine today, whereby Israelites are the chosen people. If you read the literatures of what the scholars actually mention in accordance to this particular passage, right, whatever that is being interpreted in the world today from those particular community, right, these are not what the scholars actually mentions in the commentary. Right? These are not what the scholars actually mention in the commentary. So if you go to the commentary, right, of the Torah, whereby Israelites are the chosen people of God, right, this is not the interpretation that we have today. Right? Because if you look at the history, right, the Israel of today, okay, the majority of the people, they come from Eastern Europe. They have ancestors from Eastern Europe. Their ancestries are from Eastern Europe. Right? And so they have nothing to do with the land. In fact, the Arab Israelis, or the people native, if you want to say the Canaanites, right? The Canaanites, the people from that land, not necessarily the Canaanites as per the group in biblical text, but the people from Canaan, the ancient Canaan, Tyre and Sidon, so on and so forth. Right? Modern day Lebanon, modern day Syria, modern day Palestine. Right? These people are actually second-class citizens in the land of locusts and honey today. Right? Olives, so on and so forth. And so the interpretation in accordance to what the scholars mention, okay, in their commentary, are different than what the political leaders of that land are actually trying to drive their narratives out. Okay? And so which is why we should always go back to the scholars and not go back to political leaders, because political leaders are not scholars. And political leaders will say things just to promote their political ideologies. And so us as a community, we should be smarter in where we take our knowledge from. You shouldn't take your knowledge from me. You should always verify the whatever I said. You shouldn't take anything from anybody. You shouldn't even take things from one scholar. You should take things from majority of scholars and come to a consensus as per what does the majority says. And you should actually be fair about it. Right? Meaning you have done the due diligence. You have not consulted. You are not being biased. For example, you are not only consulting evangelical scholars, you're also consulting Catholic scholars. You're also consulting, for example, in terms of Islam, you are not consulting Sunni scholars only, you're also consulting all these different mazhab. Just to be fair, you have to be fair. Right? And so if you go what the evangelical says, right, majority of evangelicals actually support the political entity in Israel because of their own ideology, right? Because of the parousia, they want to live the parousia. The parousia basically is a biblical term which means the second coming, whereby Jews, according to Paul, even Jews will be given a second chance for them to embrace and accept Jesus, because this is what the evangelicals are trying to promote. This is what they are trying to pursue. But if you look at the Catholics' position, but Catholics not necessarily share the same positions as the evangelicals when it comes to these particular matters, which is why you have millions or billions of Catholics disagree as per what is happening in the Middle East at the moment. But if you look at the evangelicals in America, especially in the UK as well, right, they support these sorts of what's happening. They support it, right? They don't necessarily support genocide. Okay, I'm not saying that, but they support, the hostilities due to some political reason. But the underlying reason it has more to do with their religious ideology. Right? So which is why in the beginning I mentioned that it is more religiously motivated as compared to politically motivated. Right? But with that being said, I stress and I emphasize that it is the responsibility of the leaders of the religious community to actually educate the community even more and constantly remind the community, right, whereby we should not be hostile to one another. We should not cause hostilities to the community, and we should come together and uphold religious. We should uphold for the betterment of the society as well as for the progress of the country, right? And I'm very fortunate, I'm very, very happy that the religious leaders of my country actually come together and discuss these sensitive matters openly and educatedly, and it has been the main reason why there are religious harmonies in my community, and that is absolutely needed and crucial for the progress and betterment of the society, right? But this is unfortunate in some countries, whereby I'm not going to mention the countries, but it is easily for you to see, whereby certain ideologies are being promoted that we should hurt the other community or even hurt the people that opposes our views. Okay? It might not be physically hurting them, call for physical violence, but it is a call for verbal violence, even verbal resentment, and this is also very, very unfortunate. And this sort of things actually upsets me, because there's so much that we can do as humanity if we leave our differences aside, because there are many things in common that we share, that we can embrace together. We might not necessarily eat at the same dinner table, but why not? Just because I disagree with your ideology, just because of the atrocities that you have done or called for, promote, or facilitate, right? That doesn't mean that I can't look at you as a human being and you can't look at me as another human being. We may disagree theologically, ideologically, politically, we will have different views, but that's what makes us human beings. Right? The world will not be a better. The world will not be a better place if you and I agree to a lot of things. We have to agree to disagree to something, right, for the betterment of the society, because this is where ideas actually blossom. This is where ideas actually bloom. And this is how Islam actually spread ideologically. Right? It is not through the sword as per the Western narratives, as per the narratives that have been ongoing for so many years. Right? Islam spread because of embracement of different ideas. That is why we have thousands of houses of wisdom throughout the Islamic Empire. Right? Baghdad, for example, hundreds of houses of wisdom. Right? And so that is how society flourished. That is why we have people from all over Europe, right, during the Abbasid time, during the Mamluks time. They fled to the Islamic lands because this is where ideas are actually opened. The society, the community is actually open as compared to Europe at that point of time. Right? The history is there, written in textbooks, published by Ivy League universities, by scholars, creme de la creme scholars, and the literatures of which I have in my home library, alhamdulillah. And so, really, education, historical education, religious education is utmost necessary, because without knowing history, right, as per historians have repeated all along, right, those who do not know history are bound to repeat the same mistakes of our predecessors. And it is especially important that leaders around the world actually educate themselves in historical knowledge. Not biased historical knowledge, but fair historical knowledge. I mention fair because why? Everybody has their own biases. But that doesn't mean that we cannot be fair. We have to be fair. For example, in my research, I have to be fair. Right? I look at what the Western scholars actually mention, those who follow the Western academia, as well as what the evangelical scholars are actually mentioning, okay, in terms of the particular text. Right? I research about what the Shias actually believes, their interpretation of Islam, Ismailis, their interpretation of Islam, right? And what the Sunnis interpretation of Islam really are. And so you have to be fair. Bias will always be there, right? And you, as human beings, we cannot say that we don't have any bias or we are 100% neutral. That's a lie, right? That's a lie. Even scholars will always have bias, right? And if you know, you know. If you know how to spot them, right, you will see that there are biases everywhere. Nobody is neutral. But that doesn't mean that nobody can come together and not necessarily embrace one another, but have the utmost tolerance towards one another, and are able, despite the many various differences that we have, and we do have tons and tons of differences, ideologically, morally, politically, whatever it is, philosophically, But that doesn't mean that we should separate ourselves, isolate ourselves from each other, because if we do that, then society cannot progress, countries cannot progress. And this is the most important lessons from today's video, is that despite the differences that we have in my country, despite the racial differences that we have, the political differences that we have, the religious differences that we have, right? Because of the efforts of the leaders of my country, right? And their efforts is not based on whatever they imagine of their mind, but it is based on data. It is based on papers being written, being produced. It is based on scholarship. It is based on education. It is based on polls, surveys, right? As well as constant engagement with the public, especially in terms of religion. That people are able to come together despite all these differences for the betterment of the society. And I believe this is where majority of the countries around the globe can actually learn from. Right? Obviously, I'm not saying that we are perfect. I'm not saying that my country is perfect. But if you look at the history of my country, I'm not here promoting my country, so to speak, right? But I found this is so relevant because I found the motto or the approach that we have taken is very effective, right? Now, obviously, different countries will have to cater differently. They have to do some modifications, right? But the approach is there, and the mentality is there, and the end goal is there. And so a lot of other countries can actually learn from my country when it comes to this. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to bore you too much. My name is Arfat, and I'll see you in my next video. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.